Hi, I'm Calicor, and we're going to be going over a few examples of how you can make your world feel a bit grander without too much major effort into expensive miniatures or putting your players into a hyper-realistic death maze designed to perfectly emulate your creation so that they can see the divinity of your inner mind. First, though, I want to show you how this video is structured. It starts with the intro, of course. You are here. Then it veers into one-liners. Simple one-line examples that can drastically improve gameplay for not a lot of attention, almost no time, and as long as they're kept as general rules, can really help you. Next, media references and their concepts, where I'll examine some media that you have most likely seen or read, and how the authors and directors show scale. Finally, the fully creative portion of this class project from hell, wherein I'm going to be showing you how I go about deciding the feeling of scale in my settings. You may also have noticed this big overarching red line. This is the creativity required for each example. Don't feel bad if your setting requires very little creativity on your part. Running a one-shot or DMing for a bunch of randos who you've just met at a convention, that's nothing that requires huge creativity from you. You can apply massive creativity to it, but it's not always necessary. Number 1, one-liners. The biggest thing that I can impart to you here today is never say big. Big is euphemistic almost for the quality of size. It doesn't have much of a function. This also goes for things such as huge, gargantuan, massive. When you say a word like massive, please consider what it means. Massive is the quality of having a lot of mass, right? So in a space setting, describing something as massive, that means this is a sizable object with a lot of mass, or if you're in a gravity well, such as we are, weight, girth, tonnage even. Next up, what the hell are you talking about? Make sure to define what it is that you're trying to say is so big, huge, massive, and grand. Is it a space, or a thing, or a paradigm? A space is what you are inhabiting or looking at through the lens of habitation. A thing is an object to you. A paradigm is a way that the world functions, right? Next up, focus on small pieces. Don't try to explain the grand scale of every single Napoleonic unit marching into the fog, preparing to meet their death. No, instead, if there are massive wars raging around, you can just focus on a small strike group, or if it's an enormous creature, just focus on one piece at a time. The enormous glaring eye of the creature. That's my stripper name. And finally, a spot of advice straight from Frenchie himself. Proper planning and preparation prevents piss-poor performance. Think ahead, even if it's just a moment every night lying in bed thinking, oh, that would be a cool creature. How can I display that it's the size of your mother? Next up, let's look at some media. Depth is a huge thing here. Something like Marvel wishes it had depth. Everything from the complete lack of societal shift after the Chitauri invasion of New York, for example, that contributes to this hollow feeling. It's not a real world. It's just what the writers want to happen. But for whatever reason, the writing departments at Marvel have just completely forgotten this. There is no impact on the world, aside from one tiny tidbit in, Spider-Man Homecoming, where a bit of Chitauri technology leaks into the hands of a crazed madman, as it tends to do. After that, there is no indication of greater scale. Endgame is breezed over. There's no societal consequence for the fact that half of the population just vanished. But I'm not salty. Everything in Cyberpunk 2077, it all links together and meshes and melds. The history of the Arasaka Corporation is closely tied to the history of Militech. The corporate wars, from what little I understand of the setting, show a real impact on people's lives. Cultures change over time. Nomadic peoples, corpos, they all gel with this world. And I think that's really apparent in one specific example in cyberpsychosis. It is a tidal indicator of the rising waters in the world. Just the treatments of cyberpsychosis involve police documentation. It involves which augmentations you can and can't have, what the therapy includes. That is depth. Scale requires depth. If you are going to build a societal paradigm, you need weight to it. POV and point of reference. Think about where your characters are and think about what they're seeing. The Truman Show and Dune have one thing in common, aside from that section where Truman says, a galactic jihad declared in my father's name, and that's their use of camera angles. Take a look at this. This camera angle is fixed from... that's kind of creepy. And this angle is directly from the cockpit of a Thopter. And it gives you a perfect point of perspective. You get the sense that this camera angle is coming from Paul Atreides' view, sitting in the front of a Thopter, watching this huge machine down below sink into the grasp of something even greater. And in the Truman Show, you get the scale of this studio and this paradigm that has allowed Truman to be imprisoned within it. You get the scale of that just from this camera angle of realizing that everything in Truman's house has to be wired up with microphones and cameras. Just the sound guy's paycheck could probably fund an aircraft carrier. So let's talk about Krakens in contrast. How do you enter and exit this sense of scale, right? Do the otherwise calm seas and refreshing breezes of the sea, do they turn to howling gusts and stiff, unyielding breakers as the almighty Leviathan surfaces from its 1,000-year sleep at the depths? Think of the scale that you want to use and consider whether your characters can even leave that scale. Blame is a crazy example of this. It is a constant slog through this broken machine where you never get the sense that you can just go upwards and see the sun. The sun is gone. There is nothing. And there is everything in every direction for as far as a human being could ever walk. This is it. You can use space to show a lot. Either you can do horrific things like what Feed the Pig does, explaining the claustrophobic feeling of, well, for those who know, you know. Or you can do what Blame does and create enormous open spaces that feel like they could go on forever. And a final thing that I want to point out to impart scale in a space is something that The Expanse and Suso no Frieren do equally well, which is playing with time. In The Expanse, when a missile is launched, immediate sensors can pick it up. But they're in space. It's going to take a certain amount of time for that missile to reach your craft. So that experience of watching that first salvo come in at speeds that would turn a human being to mush. And yet it's still so slow. So very slow that you can tell the point defense cannons where and when to shoot. And then you wait. And as you watch those spiraling, glowing specters of death creep ever closer on your monitor screen, you start to wonder. 2 minutes ago, I would have had time to chart a more accurate targeting solution. Should I have? Will my negligent error shatter the craft and scatter my crew to the unknowing void of space? Will I ever breathe again? Frieren also does this by letting the world slip by so quickly. It always feels like everything moves too fast. Characters grow and change and get old. Characters die very frequently. It's a constant question of whether, because of Frieren's immense age and ability to age, she will ever see someone again. And with that, we can safely transition into the fully creative, where I want you to consider the experience of scale, right? Who, what, when, where, why, how, and what feelings does it impart? Which of the 5 senses are being triggered by this experience? If I tell you about my grand clockwork steampunk city, that doesn't tell you much. If I tell you about the taste of the fog and that dim blur, the smell of welding coursing through the air, the metal sparks falling from some unseen project up above, or the sound of Tesla coils arcing their strange song echoing through the distant buildings. And not to pat myself on the back, but that is the ideal way that I have found to impart scale, describe how it impacts the senses. If you really want to experience this, get outside, go somewhere, and feel it. This grand sense of what this space is, what its identity is. Feel the cool mist rising off the water in the stream as you wander through. Feel the deafening roar of the passing cars echo through your lungs and sternum. Keep in mind that everything here has a opposite, right? This leads me to my next point, that it's not always a bad thing to put hard numbers to something. Dungeons & Dragons does this pretty well with inspiration. GURPS is absolutely merciless with this. It is ridiculous how many different reaction bonuses and sanity checks and environmental reaction rolls might influence your character. Not to feed into the perception that GURPS is an overly complex game, but it can be. So try to think of what the characters feel in this moment. Try to read the players a little. Think of their fear as a disadvantage or their inspiration from the grand beauty of this space. Apply their advantage. Think of how this space complements their skills. That sort of thing. And try to use actual number bonuses to show your characters that, oh, this is a space or a thing or a paradigm that is so grand that it actually changes the way that I can interact with reality. It changes my abilities. Or you can use others for scale. You can follow a specific character through the mayhem. 1917 does this very, very well, showing the, scale of World War I through the lens of just one scared teenager. You can also use metagaming elements. You can use music or ambiance, lighting, miniatures. These all have harsh downsides because if you can't convey the atmosphere properly, or you're just plonking down a miniature and saying, okay, so this thing has 96 D8, that will not work, Chief. Like I said, remember the 7 Ps. Proper preparation and planning prevents piss poor performance. Finally, your style and your tonal delivery is the biggest part of this. You cannot impart scale if you're just saying that, oh, the room is big. Oh yeah, it's huge. It's massive. That's like 8d8 points. Psychic damage, I think. No, your delivery needs to be clean and linear, and your tone and your word choice and just the way that you interact with your players and try to understand what they want from this and how to get under their skin and give them what they require from this scale. That's the biggest part, and it is the most difficult. These last few tips, they are going to chafe you a little because they are not easy to do, and they're not easy for me. They're not going to be easy for you. I don't think they're easy for Matt fucking Mercer, but they are important, and they will convey scale better than anything else. And a brief aside, sometimes you do need to squash down your creativity and use your honesty and respect for people's time and your sense of fun, and let that take you to good places. Moving through life by following every rule sucks. Keep that in mind. I wrote out the whole script for this video, and I still feel like I'm missing pieces, so if there's anything that you do that I don't have listed here, or some inversion of my principles, please feel free to share that in the comments. And yeah, thank you for your time. Calicor out. Oh my lord, that was a big glorp. I wish my stomach would stop making that sound. I have just massively discredited myself. Maybe that won't fit for you. I don't really care. I don't know what that says. I can't read my own handwriting. My neighbor is taking a shit. GURPS is unforgiving. Okay, I'm getting a fucking drink. This is ridiculous. Ugh.